Today's scripture is found on page 1137 of your Pew Bibles. And it's from the book of 1 Corinthians. It's chapter 13. And it's verses 4 through 7. Starting at verse 4. Love is patient, love is kind. Does not envy, does not boast. It is not proud. It is not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres.
You know, I plan my messages, at least start to work on them, about a month in advance, sometimes longer. And I knew that when Sunday, August the 4th came, that I'd be feeling a little nostalgic. And I decided that rather than stand up behind the pulpit or even stand in front of you at all and do a sermon the way I usually do it, that I would just get a chair, get this podium, and sit down and talk with you a little bit. And I'm going to make a promise. Thank you. You'll be out of here considerably before noon. All right? I'm asked every month to write an article for the newsletter of the Christian Motorcyclist Association of God's Armor Bearers. And I want to use the article I wrote for the August edition as my intro today before I get into the rest. All right? I'm just going to read it to you, what I wrote. I'd like to use my space this month to share some personal information in praise to God. August 2013 is a milestone month for the Moors. Mary and I will celebrate our 35th anniversary, and it will also mark our 35th year in pastoral ministry together. It will also mark 20 years at TFMC. Can you believe you've been putting up with me for that long? That's not in there. I'm asking you. And we've begun our 10th year at Biker Church. These are milestones that no one cares about except us, but ones that we reflect on as evidences of the grace of God to undeserving people like us. It's much too easy to divorce your spouse for all kinds of silly reasons. It's estimated that 1,700 pastors per month leave the ministry in the USA. 85% of seminary grads will quit the ministry within 5 years, and 90% who start in pastoral ministry do not retire in that role. We've managed to somehow beat the odds. God deserves the credit, praise, glory, and adoration. We are but His servants, waiting to do His bidding. None of us knows how much longer we have to be on this earth, but I do know the best way to spend our remaining days is to be faithful to Him and be people of integrity. Keep your promises even when it costs you. Keep your promises. All right. Even when it costs you more than you expected. Do what you say you will do, even when it's difficult. Stand for truth, even when it's unpopular. I love the book of Proverbs, and two of my promise verses are Proverbs 10:9, the man of integrity walks securely, but he who takes crooked paths will be found out. Proverbs 11:3, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. I claim these and recommend them to you. Have integrity in your marriage, your home, on the job, and in your church. You will be secure, and God will guide you. He promised. All right. Now, I titled the sermon, 35 Years of P.I. And I asked the folks in the early service to guess what P.I. is, and somebody guessed personal integrity. I thought that was a pretty good guess, but that's not what I meant by it. P.I. is the opposite of P.C. Y'all know what P.C. is? political correctness. I want to talk to you about 35 years of being politically incorrect. Now, as I said in the article I wrote to CMA, or for CMA, pastors are dropping out at a rate $1,700 a month, just imagine. Most people who start in ministry don't finish there. I had a friend tell me just this past week, he's about 3 years in and he's ready to throw in the towel. The average tenure for a pastor at any given church is between 5 and 7 years. And I went back and looked at my history before coming here. I was at Meadville 7 years, Du Bois 2 years, and Lockport 6 years. The average comes out to be 5. So before I became the pastor here, I was one of the average. About every 5 years, go to a different church. So I started in getting ready for this sermon and thinking about the milestones that August 2013 brings to my life and to marry me together. I started to ask some questions to myself. How are we beating the odds? Why is it that we're an anomaly instead of the norm? Why is it we don't fall into the 50% of the marriages that end in divorce? Why is it I didn't quit after the first 7 years? Not that I never felt like it. Believe me, sometimes I still do. So I came to the conclusion, and partially to have a catchy title, is because we're politically incorrect. We don't try to be PC. And let me give you some examples, just first from our personal life and then from my preaching. One of the things is that, and they tell you not to do this, right? We put the other person's needs ahead of our own. I read a book way back when I was first married called His Needs, Her Needs, Building an Affair-Proof Marriage by Willard F. Harley Jr. When I was done with it, I gave it to Mary, and she read it. I have recommended the book to people who are engaged. I recommended it in premarital counseling and marital counseling. I still recommend it. I don't care if you've been married 50 years or you're just starting out. It's a great book to read and to practice. You know, we try to look good for each other. In fact, we give power. I give certain powers over myself to her and her to me. And I'll just give you one simple example. We make hair decisions for each other. Now, I built right into the sermon the pause here. But here's the thing. I've wanted for a long time to shave my head, but she says no. And so I don't. And if you're a woman, you can understand this. There are some days when she says, "Oh, this hair, I'm just going to cut it short." And I say, "No, you're not." And we respect each other's decisions when it comes to that. We have lived pretty much fairly traditional roles, especially when our kids were little. I brought home the bacon, she cooked the bacon. We had our children, we figured it was our responsibility to take care of them. Not that we never got a babysitter, but Mary was a stay-at-home mom. I was dad, and that's pretty. Now, I'm not saying that it has to be that way, but what I'm doing is I'm reflecting, I'm telling you how we've taken what we thought were biblical principles and applied them, and they weren't always the politically correct ones. I had a relative tell me, "Well, you're so lucky that Mary can stay home with the kids. I have to work." Yeah. They both did have to work to keep the boat and the extra car and the vacation property and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, see, we never had things like that. We've discovered the key to financial success. And you can read books, you can go to seminars, but I'm going to give it to you in one sentence, the key to financial success. If you follow this, I promise it'll always work. Are you ready? I don't care if you make $10,000 or $250,000. This always works. However much money you make, spend less. Isn't that easy? I'll tell you what that does. That'll mean less debt, which means less stress, and you'll be free to give more, and you'll be blessed more and be a blessing. We also followed Bill Cosby's advice. I remember all the time he and Claire used to talk. They'd be having trouble with the kids. Remember the Bill Cosby show? And when the kids weren't around, he would look at her and he'd say, "Remember, Claire, it's us against them." Never let the kids come between you. In fact, children are more secure when they know that mom and dad love each other more than anyone else. I'm going to be discreet since we're in a mixed age and mixed gender with the next couple, but let me just put it like this. Before the wedding, no hanky-panky. But after the wedding, we made up for it with lots of hanky and panky. Okay? We didn't let others' expectations rule our lives. Would you believe it? This is probably a shock to you for me to tell you this. Would you believe that some people put unreasonable expectations on the pastor and his family? Say it isn't so. But it is. But we never let other people define who we are. We don't act one way in public and a different way in private. What we are is what we are. And this is more difficult for me than for Mary because of my job. But no private activities, or no meeting alone, or no going on social outings with a member of the opposite sex. Now you say, wait a minute, Pastor Don, I'm a woman. You mean I could never have a private meeting with you if I need counseling? No, you could, but I guarantee you that while we're talking, it'd be just our ears alone hearing, but there would be someone else nearby. Even if you come to my house and we go downstairs in the Steeler room, which I know everybody wants to see. I wouldn't do that if we were the only two in the house. I would make sure Mary was also in the house. She wouldn't hear what we were talking about, but she'd be there. Never alone with a member of the opposite sex. It saves you from false accusations and also from temptation. Then, especially when I'm in premarital counseling, I like to tell people the dictionary story. Before we got married, I handed Mary a dictionary, and I said, "This is a dictionary we're going to use if we get married." "Yeah, okay, Webster's Dictionary." I said, "No, you got to open it and look at it." So she opened it up, and I had gone to the D section, and I went to the word divorce, and I cut out the word and the definition. And I said, if we're going to get married, this word is not in our vocabulary anymore. It's never an option. Okay. Now, I say that to you not because I think there's never a legitimate reason. Obviously, if I'd have been beating Mary up, she'd have been stupid not to divorce me. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is some of the silly things I've heard down through the years. For example, the man who told me that he divorced his wife because he did not like her work schedule. All right? So that's some politically incorrect stuff personally. Let me talk about 35 years of politically incorrect preaching. I found a quote by an English bishop that I would like to use as a transition into this part. And he said this: wherever Jesus went, there was either a revival or a revolution. Wherever I go, they serve tea. So the question I have is, do I, as a preacher of the gospel, want to start a revival or revolution? Or do I want to drink tea? And my answer is this: I don't really like tea that much. I'd rather start a revival or a revolution. Now, when we talk about being politically correct, a lot of people think they know what it means. You know, oh, that happened because of political correctness. I'm going to read you the definition. It's quite long. I was surprised myself when I found it. It's a term that describes language, ideas, policies, behavior seen as seeking to minimize social and institutional offense in occupational, gender, racial, cultural, sexual orientation, religious belief, disability, and age-related context. Now, the key word here is offense. In the PC world, no one is to ever be offended. Now, certainly as a Christian, I don't go out of my way to offend people. I don't try to offend people. I don't want to be offensive. But the bottom line is, the gospel is offensive. To people who want to live however they want without any consequences, the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Bible is offensive. Because it tells me there's a standard, the Bible, and if I'm in violation of it, then I'm wrong. That is offensive. You can't help it. So if I'm going to be a preacher of the gospel, by the very nature of what I'm talking about, I'm going to offend people. And so I've been politically incorrect in my preaching. Now, you may or may not know this, but the early Christians were not persecuted for following Jesus. They weren't persecuted for their religion. They were persecuted for odium humani generis. Hatred of the human race. Okay? That's what they were accused of. And we are beginning to witness that today in a climate of hatred towards us who follow the Bible. And no more evident than in the Supreme Court's recent denial of and striking down the Defense of Marriage Act. Now, please, if you haven't listened to me at all yet, listen very closely to this. Justice Anton Scalia, in his dissenting opinion of the Supreme Court striking down of the Defense of Marriage Act, wrote this. This decision, invalidating DOMA, could have broader implications. By formally declaring anyone opposed to same-sex marriage an enemy of human decency, the majority arms well every challenger to a state law restricting marriage to its traditional definition. But even more troubling is the language used by the majority describing those who favor traditional marriage. Those who passed DOMA, they said, acted with purpose to disparage and injure homosexual couples. They want to demean and impose inequality and a stigma on them. They want to deny them equal dignity, to declare them as unworthy, and to humiliate their children. This kind of language paints all traditional marriage supporters as bigots and enemies of the human race. The same accusation put upon the early Christians. Our own Supreme Court now says, if you take a stand for biblical marriage, you are acting as an enemy of the human race. I've been telling you for a few years now that I believe the day will come when I will be arrested for refusing to preside over a couple who wants to get married who are of the same gender. I'm not wishing for this. I'm not hoping for this. I have no desire to be a martyr. But I believe it's coming. In England, there's already an activist who is trying to force Christian churches, all Christian churches, to open their doors and force the minister to preside over all weddings, regardless of what the makeup of the couple or however many people want to get married. Some other places that I have it politically incorrect, and this is not an exhaustive list, but I told you it would be done significantly before noon. I believe that God created everything from nothing. I believe Jesus is the only way to God and the only way to heaven, because he said, I am the way, and no one comes to the Father but by me. I believe there's an absolute right and wrong, and the Bible is the standard for that. I believe life begins at conception. And here's an absolutely crazy idea. Get married, then have a baby. I believe you should not look out for number one, but should look out for others first. I believe the Bible when it says, he that does not work should not eat. Now, excluded from this are widows, the elderly, children, and disabled. God is first with my money and everything else. And disagreeing with somebody else's beliefs or lifestyles does not mean I hate them. You know what it means? I disagree with them. Now, our society is becoming increasingly hostile to anybody who follows the Bible. One more example, right in our own United States, San Antonio, Texas. If I interpreted what I read correctly, if you work for the city of San Antonio, okay, you are a city employee, and say you go to your church on Sunday and you stand up as a Sunday school teacher and you read Matthew 19, 4 through 6 about God creating the male and female and how that's what marriage should be, you can be fired from your job for doing something outside of work, expressing your own freedom of religion in your own church, and they find out about it, you could be fired. Now, I invite you to Google that story, to read it yourself, and if I interpreted that wrong, you tell me. I will make a public correction, but that's the way I understand it. So for 35 years, I've been living a politically incorrect life. I've been preaching from a politically incorrect Bible. And I tell you that as I begin my 36th year, I intend to not change either. That's correct. Lord, I have no desire to be politically correct, but I have much desire to be biblically correct. And whatever that cost is, I pray that you will help me to bear it. I'm not asking for persecution. I'm not wishing it. But Lord, whatever comes my way, and however it comes, help me and all of us to stand true to your word and to Jesus, for it's in his name we pray. Amen.